Welcome back to the Samong Yang Outdoors Podcast. I'm your host, Samong, here, joined by co-host Nate, as always. And this week, we're on the same side of the studio because we have a guest in front of us. This is probably not a new face to many of you. We got Mr. Jacob Villasenor. It's been a minute since Jacob and I have actually seen each other. It's been a minute since he's actually been on a platform of mine. I believe the last time we did anything together, 2 years ago in Hawaii? I think that was the last time we saw each other. But even though we don't always see each other, Jacob's always bothering me through the phone. So he never leaves me alone. It's like texting me and calling me and doing stuff like that. And we were just joking it before the podcast started. Like, it'll be like 7 o'clock in the morning. And I'm like, why is my phone vibrating? And it's like Jacob's calling me. I'm like, this dude wants to talk to me first thing at 7 o'clock in the morning. Like, what is wrong with this guy? Anyways, with that said, this week we're excited, man. Jacob's back in town. Where are you out of now?
I live in Colorado Springs now. My wife's active duty nurse, military. So we were in Hawaii for almost 4 years, actually, and then just moved to Colorado Springs last fall.
How long are you guys planning to stay there?
You don't really plan in the military. It just kind of like comes and goes, but probably 3 years. But if we like the area so far, we bought a house there.
Okay.
So if we want to stabilize there, there's an opportunity potentially to do that, but it's all up to her career and where the Army wants her to be, and where she's pretty good at the Army, so she gets to kind of pick. That's why we've gone from Hawaii to Colorado Springs, which are some of the most sought-after duty locations, is because my wife's a badass, and she basically picked where she wanted to go. So
she keeps in mind your hunting enthusiastic mindset, and it's like, oh, maybe Colorado's not bad for Jacob.
Well, we both wanted mountains after Hawaii and no seasons. It was like mountains and seasons were at the top of the list. I tried to get her to go Anchorage, Alaska. I'm still kind of pushing that because I think 3 years there would be probably...
Anchorage is a beautiful place.
Yeah.
I'm not going to lie, because I was there last year. I wasn't hunting, I was fishing, but, dude, it's a beautiful place up there.
And I have to say something. Samong was the only person that came out to Hawaii to hunt with me that wasn't immediate family.
That's right.
Huh. And we had a good... That was
fun.
Trip. Every trip, every video, like I look back on, it's like we had a
great time.
Yeah.
Yeah, that was like... Because we've done spring turkey right around this neck of the woods up here. We've done muzzleloader elk together. Still one of the craziest hunts I've ever been a part of. And then obviously Hawaii. And so Jacob's actually been like, dude, you got to get your Colorado points and stuff like that. But I was telling you, it's like, dude, man, like out of all the states I've been building points, it's like Colorado's been like one of the last states like that's been on my radar. But
well, I'm starting to get some insider knowledge, so hopefully we can get
Nate was telling me that he's starting to possibly start building points in Colorado.
Yeah.
I've been building points, well, not for very long, but I've started the process.
Well, that's perfect. I can cut my teeth, figure out all the hoops and challenges.
That's why I wasn't in a rush. I was like, let him figure it out first. I just show up and shoot a big buck or something.
Well, how many days do you think we've hunted together? Not counting like big game.
Not counting big game?
No,
counting big game.
Counting only big game. No, not turkeys or anything else.
Do you consider Hawaii big game?
Yeah. It's like 4 days total.
Yeah, not a lot.
And how many animals have we killed?
A lot.
Like 8 or 9 in 3 days of hunting?
10. I think like 10 in 4 days, which is a crazier ratio when you think about it. And then if you count turkey, dude, that number even goes up even more because we've killed some turkeys together too. Yeah. Anyways, that's a really long intro. We're excited to have Jacob in studio. Jacob actually drove all the way up from Colorado. He's got his brand new rig sitting outside making fun of our Yodas outside. But, hey, there's 2 of us here. He can't.
Your guys' trucks are better for getting in nasty country. But,
anyways, with that said, before we get into any more conversation, we want to thank the companies that make this possible. The first one being Vortex Optics. You guys know the drill. Longtime partner of ours, and budget-wise, it doesn't really matter where you are in the spectrum. They have something for you. And that goes across all of the categories from binoculars, rifle scopes, spotting scopes, rangefinders, even tripods. And don't forget their apparel. I think Vortex has some of the best apparel you can buy on the market in terms of a company that doesn't sell you apparel as their primary item. With that said, if you're interested in anything Vortex, you can shop at eurooptic.com and use code SY10 to save on some cash.
Second, we want to thank Onyx Hunt, and as you guys know, it's just the best mapping software out there. Whether you're scouting or in the hunt, online, offline maps, 3D, LiDAR. They've got all the layers. In fact, Jacob might be able to give us a little more insight into some of those layers that we're not so familiar with, maybe as Western hunters, because we're going to kind of dive into a little bit of that today. But yeah, Onyx is the best.
That's right.
That's the long and short of it.
Next one we want to thank is Argali Outdoors. These are our backcountry shelters, sleeping bags, trekking poles, and game bags of choice, because when it comes to Argali, one, we like lightweight equipment, but at some point, your equipment that is lightweight also can't be sacrificing durability. And I feel like Argali has really found that balance between lightweight and durability across their whole lineup. My favorite Argali product, if I had to just name one, is the Alpine sleeping bag. I think it's just the best when it comes to dollar for dollar. It packs the best punch because a 0 degree rated sleeping bag from Argali is going to keep you comfortable at 0 degrees. It's not false marketing like a lot of the other companies that sell you sleeping bag that say it's a 0 degree sleeping bag, but in reality, it's more like a 20 degree sleeping bag and whatnot.
Yeah. And lastly, we want to thank Tacticam, specifically their Reveal line of cell cameras. And they've got a whole gamut of cell cameras, from pretty basic cell cameras that are still reliable all the way up to fancy ones that like the Ultra that you can live stream with, which is kind of crazy to say. But they are great. They have lots of features within their app too, things that you can link with Onyx for pins. You can do wind directions, you can do postal codes, all sorts of things to help get even more data and link data from multiple cameras together with deer. They can look at moon phases, weather, precipitation patterns, all that stuff to help you kind of figure out deer and other animals and what they're doing.
That's right. I feel like a lot of the companies that sponsor this might have a direct play in what we're going to talk about today, but are you familiar with Trivia Duel?
I am.
Did you bring something for
I
us?
did.
I figured
it was
you
kind of
would've.
last minute. I had one, but I was listening back to your older episodes, and I was like, no way, they stole it from me.
Oh, did we?
Austin Harris stole it from me.
Well, honestly, I probably already forgot. So, I don't
No, it's
know.
different. I picked
Oh,
a
you changed a different one?
Yeah.
All right. Well, in that case, since you're the guest, we tend to let the guests go first because not every single guest brings a Trivia Duel or a Fast Fact. So when they do, we like to give them the spotlight.
So mine is during winter, according to one study in, I think it was Michigan, what percentage of a deer's diet is woody browse
In winter.
in winter? And I'll say
Woody
60,
browse.
Yeah, 60%, 70%, 80%, or 90%.
That's crazy because that's like really similar to mine. So I'm curious to see if the numbers are going to be like.
And this plays back to one of your or last episode where you guys talked about
Okay, so
that I listened to.
So your
about
question
baiting.
is, during the winter, how much in terms of percentage is a deer's diet woody browse?
woody browse. Yeah.
Name, is this going to give away my answer or my trivia? How you go first? What's your guess?
I'm going to say 80%.
I'm going to go 70%.
Okay. So the answer is 90%. And
What?
this plays back the episode I listened to last. This isn't the one that came
Uh-huh.
out before this is going to come out. But when you guys were talking about deer dying of supplemental feeding, it's because since a deer's eating 90% woody browse, their gut, their rumen, the microbial activity has completely shifted in order to break down that woody browse. So in that period, if you then shock them with something that their gut is not able to digest at that moment in time, that's when they're susceptible to rumen acidosis that will kill them when you like feed them corn, which is typically between June and March. So late season, depending on like, because this is different by region, right? But like I would imagine it's similar to like northern Michigan, or it might have been the Adirondacks actually in New York where the study came out of. To here, because we have kind of a similar mountainous native browse, there's less agriculture and things like that. Because in Iowa, Midwest, Illinois, all those places that produce a lot of soybeans, hunters will leave soybeans over the wintertime, which is a high carb, the actual bean itself, not the leaf, but the bean, and they'll leave it, whole fields of it, just standing unharvested, and the deer will eat it throughout the wintertime. And they won't die because they've consistently been eating that, and their gut microbiome hasn't shifted to entirely woody browse like in areas like we live in. So
You want to know something? I totally expected a question like that from Jacob.
Me too.
He's such a nerd, dude. Numbers are Jacob's favorite thing. So when he gave me a full myriad of numbers, I was like, that's what it is.
So we're going to talk about whitetails today coming up, and Jacob invited me over to the property that he's been doing whitetail food plot stuff on, and the rabbit hole of different native and planted food plots and stuff that I didn't know I was stepping into was a shock. Talk about a shock to your biome.
It was the moment we went into the first food plot and I was like, I don't have enough time to explain everything that's going on here, because I saw the look on your face of me talking about all the different plant species and the soil, and it was like it looked like a wave hit Nate.
Yeah, I was like, holy cow.
It was just word jumble at that point.
We're serious about this.
Yeah.
That's funny.
Yeah, I've nerded out really hard on this, and it's kind of changed how I'm moving forward. Because I still don't really hunt that property. I'm not really hunting private property at the moment. Mm-hmm. But I think the things I'm learning doing that habitat management stuff, like native browse stuff, like when they're eating what, is like completely shifted how I'm like moving forward, trying to scout and stuff.
I'm stoked to pick your brain about that stuff, because that's something that I don't ever do, so I don't really know anything about it. Mm-hmm. Well, I think my trivia duel is similar enough that I think they kind of go hand in hand.
Okay.
So, in terms of percentage, what type of food do white-tailed deer eat the most throughout the year? I'll give you guys 4 options if you guys want them, unless you want a shot in the dark.
Let's do shot in the dark.
Okay. Okay, I'll let you go first. Okay, just type of food. So it's a very general, like it's not like a specific food. It's the category of food.
Shrubs or woody browse is what I'll go with.
Okay.
I need options.
Okay, I'll give you your options. Forbs, browse, or woody.
Browse, yeah.
Or woody,
Browse,
whatever he just said.
Yeah.
Mast, which is fruits, nuts, berries, and seeds. Or lichens and fungus.
I'm going to have to say browse.
I forgot to give you guys the percentage. But you guys' answer is right. That is the type of food that whitetail deer eat the most. Now, to go one step further, do you know the percentage of the browse?
Well, it depends in the season.
If you averaged it, do you know the average percentage?
I'm going to shoot for 45%.
What about you?
I'm going to say 70% because that's what you guessed for his answer. I'm just being strategic about it.
No, Jacob's on the money. Dude, this guy's a nerd, bro. I am telling you guys. So on average, it's probably closer to about that 45, 50 mark, but it can go up to 70%. So basically how it does, or it goes, is that browse is more or less the majority of what they eat, regardless of the time of season. But the amount of that in terms of how it's proportionate to the other stuff, like lichen and all that stuff, it fluctuates. So spring, summer, and fall, browse is pretty consistent around 42 to 45%. And then in the winter, it shoots up to about 64%-ish, sometimes a little bit higher. And then obviously that's going to disproportionately affect the other browse and whatnot. But at the end of the day, like browse is what deer are primarily doing, which I don't think a lot of people would think about that.
And this is all based off of a study in a certain region.
Yeah, this was based off of the Deer Association.
Yeah, which they do a lot of work in Tennessee, Mississippi. And in Mississippi, they work in food plot supplemental feeding areas and native areas. So when they do deer studies like that, they typically have fenced areas, and they'll study like how much of their diet is supplemental versus how much of is it native. So the difference, like down there during the wintertime in the south, you're going to have forbs and other things available throughout the winter because it never gets cold enough to kill off a lot of those forbs and legumes and things that they are higher protein, whereas somewhere like the Adirondacks or Washington State, almost all of that goes away. And that's, if you're looking at kind of deer trophy potential, that's one of the biggest indicators of their potential in a non-supplemental way. So like if you look at the biggest buck states of like Iowa, like if you look at the band Colorado, South Dakota, Iowa, Southern Michigan, Wisconsin, those are all like big buck whitetail states, right? Because they have like a really good balance of, one, the habitat and the supplemental food that they're getting, and it carrying through that winter stress period. Because if a deer, doe, or buck goes into winter and then has to rely solely on woody browse, which is not highly nutritious, right? It is at different times. Like the browse that I was showing you today in the springtime, that little tip of those shrubs that I was showing you are probably packed with nutrients, more so than the clover that was planted right next to it. And that's why they're selecting for it at that moment. But in the wintertime, it's like all the leaves are gone. They're basically on the tips. You can see brush, and in public land areas where it looks like it's been mowed, the tips of it have been mowed off by moose, elk, deer,
Dude,
whatever.
that's crazy that you just know this off the top of your head.
Well,
I can't believe that.
Well, I mean, the past 2 years, it's like
That's all you've been doing.
all I've been doing. I've been in Hawaii,
There's maybe a little bit of I miss home and
and I've come
gotta do
back,
something.
called for elk on a couple quality hunts here in Washington.
dude, it's been you've done a lot of things. We'll have to catch up. Anyways, Nate, what about you? What's your trivia duel?
All right, mine's pretty simple. What state do you have the highest likelihood of hitting a deer with your car in? Now, this is not what state has the most whitetail or most deer car collisions, but what state has the highest percentage of drivers that hit deer.
So it's a ratio.
It's a ratio.
Okay.
So your options are Montana, Michigan, West Virginia, and Pennsylvania.
I feel like you threw Pennsylvania in there to throw us off because Pennsylvania has a lot of deer. A lot of deer.
Jacob's shaking his head.
I feel I'm just gonna let him answer first.
No. I think you got to answer first.
I'll show you about that part. So speaking in terms of just collision number, I would like to think that Pennsylvania would have the highest because there's simply a lot of deer in Pennsylvania. But I don't know if there's enough people that hit the amount of deer that live in Pennsylvania to warrant it as the number one ratio of highest percentage collision states. But at the same time, that could very well be the answer because he's shaking his head. So I'm just going to Montana's probably not the right answer. But because Nate has hit a deer in Montana.
Yeah, if we're going off a case study in this room.
It's 1 to 0 to everything. I'm just going to go to Montana because he's hit a deer in Montana.
Okay.
It's probably not the right answer, but I'm just going to go Montana.
My logic on this, and the reason I shook my head is because I know Pennsylvania has a lot of deer, and they also have a lot of like urban centers where the deer have encroached into like suburban and stuff. With that being said, Michigan has a crazy amount of deer in certain zones. Mm-hmm. The population I don't think is as high, so it's one of the two. And I think just to maybe spite Samong and go against his gut on Pennsylvania.
I'm saying I think Pennsylvania is probably the best guess.
Okay.
But because I know somebody in this room that's hit a deer in Montana, it's just kind of
So you're saying Montana, you're saying Pennsylvania. All right. Your logic, Samong, was on the money. So Pennsylvania has the highest number of deer collisions annually, and they do it by insurance claims. Mm-hmm. And they have about 150,000 insurance claims annually for deer collisions. However, the state with the highest ratio is West Virginia.
I had a feeling.
Because there's not very many people there and a ton of deer.
I would assume a lot of deer, less people, and more developed, more roads. And on any given year, a driver in West Virginia has a 1 in 38 chance of hitting a deer. So
I wonder
Montana and Michigan are also up there. They're number like 3 and 4.
Oh, wow.
Montana's number 2. I think it was 1 in 50.
Montana's number 2?
Yeah, 1 in 50-something drivers will hit a deer in Montana every year.
That's still impressive.
Yeah, that's a high ratio.
That's a lot of deer that get killed. But West Virginia.
Dang.
That's interesting.
That's interesting. Wow, all three of us, we decided to go with the percentage trivia duel.
A true trivia question that's related, not off the wall. Do you have an off the wall fast fact today, or is it going to be related? For those of you guys that don't know,
mine's related.
Samong will come with fast facts, which we do at the end of the episode, and he goes off the wall. So.
Not this week. This week I kept it pretty focused on what we're talking about.
So we have Jacob in the studio, as you guys have heard, and we've kind of had a drawn out introduction and trivia duel and all that here. But today we're going to be a little less formal. We don't have a specific topic, although it kind of will probably narrow itself down here into a fairly specific topic. But I'll let Jacob expand more. But you've kind of been, You've been on a journey over the last 2 years, and the reference point of today is northeast whitetail.
Western whitetail.
Okay,
In
Western
general,
whitetail.
the northwest, the subspecies northwestern whitetail. There's a subspecies that is called the northwestern whitetail.
Oh, that's an actual species?
Yeah, I think it's Odocoileus something. I don't know what the.
Oh, okay, stop throwing big words at us. Man. They go in one ear, out the other ear.
It's basically the range is from central Washington to kind of a zone in eastern Montana.
Okay.
Following the Rocky Mountains down at like the tip of Utah and cutting back.
So is that the species of whitetail we hunt?
Yeah.
What's the difference? Do you know?
I think in general there's probably like a body size difference because there's like the Virginian whitetail, which I think is like the Midwest whitetail or something, and then there's a couple southern species, and I think there might be a northern Canadian. I don't know. There's a couple of them. Coos deer, another subspecies.
How many
So you're
species
saying
are there?
Western whitetail is the same subspecies of whitetail as coos deer is to subspecies of whitetail?
Yep.
Really?
Wow.
Yeah.
That's interesting because I feel like the coos deer get thrown around.
They're almost like
talking
their own
about
species.
hunting like as their own thing. Almost, I mean, yes, as a whitetail, but as almost this almost like a separate animal.
It's probably because they're so distinct.
Yeah.
Where a northwestern whitetail and like a Midwest whitetail, whatever that subspecies is, I don't remember. The differences are pretty
marginal.
pretty marginal.
subtle.
Yeah.
It's probably like a Merriam to a Rio Grande turkey, and then you put an ocellated turkey next to them.
Yeah.
They're all turkeys, but one's very different.
Yep. That's
Very
pretty
interesting.
Pretty good analogy.
Okay, so sorry, my correction. Northwestern whitetail.
And it's not even just whitetail, but I think whitetail's the most applicable to the
food
use
plot.
case and food plot stuff. But I think in certain areas, you could apply it to black-tailed deer or mule deer. It doesn't really matter if you're doing habitat work for wildlife. I think this can apply.
And something that's really interesting about this conversation and the timing of this conversation is that at the time that you started this, baiting was not banned in Washington, right?
Not entirely.
Yeah.
It was the first year that they did a regional with the CWD outbreak.
Okay.
Yeah.
But it wasn't a statewide ban. And so this wasn't necessarily sparked by the fact of I need to find alternative ways, or was it?
A little bit. I think I saw the writing on the wall. The CWD thing was moving west. I had seen like the surveys of like who was for and who was against baiting in Washington, and it was like a 50-50 split. And I baited on public land for starting in 2021. I think the first year I started hunting the big woods for public land whitetail and baiting and kind of doing that stuff. And then seeing that, and then the CW thing kind of popping up, I was like, I don't think it's going to be around much longer. And then when the CWD popped up, I was like, okay, it's coming.
And it happened fast.
Yeah.
CW hit, and I think it was only a couple months later, and they're like, yep, it's done.
Yeah. So it was something I had like been looking into, especially because when my in-laws first bought that property, like it's in an area where you should have a ton of deer, right?
Yep.
And there really wasn't that many deer. It was like pretty marginal. Like I said, we'd get like 1.5 and 2.5-year-old bucks. I think in 22, before I did anything, we had like a 140 kind of 6x6 frame come through 2 days during the rut, hit an apple tree I had a camera on in the middle of the night, and then never showed his face again. So it was like, there's good bucks in the area, but the property wasn't holding them. So I was already kind of had my wheels spinning of like, how can we make this better?
So give us some reference here and some background to what you've been doing these last couple of years.
That was like kind of, it lined up that 2024 year. I had already kind of been thinking about it. The CW thing popped up, and I was like, okay, I'm going full tilt into looking into this stuff. And so I jumped on the internet, I jumped on forums, I jumped on YouTube, and I basically consumed all there is food plot and habitat deer related information. And it was kind of still a little last minute or not fully thought out because I didn't know if I'd had time to come back from Hawaii in order to do it.
Yeah, because when you're doing this, you don't live here.
No.
And so you're like trying to plan very efficiently so that when you are here, you're like, I only have a few days to do this.
Yep.
And that's kind of what you were doing.
Yeah, so it basically lined up. I was calling for Keegan, a guy you've hunted with.
Yep,
His
Keegan.
dad drew a quality muzzleloader elk tag in the Yakima region, which I've hunted quite a bit. And I had called for Keegan's aunt in 2021 when she drew a tag, and we had a fun time calling in elk. And so I called for his dad. He shot a legal spike 6x2, which, like, the fact that he killed that bull, I was like, this is the unicorn that everyone searches for on the spike.
On the over-the-counter.
Because it branched basically right, and it was just a 2-point that came right out of the base on the one side.
Yep.
And a 6x on the other. So
yeah, because by definition, it's only a point if it's at least above 4 inches from the base.
Yep.
Yeah.
So had a great time on that hunt, and then I had time after where I kind of was like, if I'm going to do it, I'll probably do it, around that. That's when you would plant a fall food plot, which is kind of a big time in the Midwest and East Coast for planting a food plot that's going to be attractive during the hunting season. So I planted what's called cereal rye, which is like a wheat variety. It's not a variety of wheat. It's in the same family, so it's a cereal grain. But it's typically used as a cover crop, where wheat is harvested. It is harvested for the grain too. If you think of what's the Reuben sandwich bread?
I have no idea.
Right, it's
just
rye bread.
Rye
bread.
bread.
Yeah. Sorry, I don't make dough. So yeah, it's used for that specific, but it has kind of an off taste, and it's not used in a lot of other, flour uses besides rye bread. But it's used as a cover crop because it grows really fast, and it puts down a lot of root material that suppresses weeds. But it also, for deer, and this is where it kind of came in, this is what's used kind of in the food plot industry, right, is it grows super fast and it can germinate, I think, at 34, 36 degrees and grow at like 38 degrees. So you can plant it super late and it'll start to grow and it'll stay green longer than almost any other native browse. And when it's like this tall, super packed with protein, the deer will just come by and like mow it basically. So it's super attractive. I knew it would grow in the area, so we bought some seed and I rented a seeder from the local conservation district, which basically just laid the seed onto the dirt and like packed it in. So it wasn't like a super fancy seed or anything. So I tilled everything up, basically covered myself in dust for 2 days, like probably have cancer from that or something. But
dude, my allergies would be killing me.
Yeah. Yeah. So cloud of dust, plant, and then it ended up being like one of the driest falls we've had in a long time. So we didn't get rain till I think October 22nd or something. And so it started to grow like in early November, but it wasn't like it didn't come in even. It was like kind of here, like hit and miss. Some of the fields I don't think germinated till the following spring. Super patchy. And I don't think the deer really I think they kind of ate it a little bit, but it just wasn't thick enough for them to be like in there all the time.
And this was just a single species plant of cereal rye.
Yeah, because it was too late for me to really plant anything else to like consistently get growth. And really the key thing is get growth by season in order for it to be attractive. A lot of the stuff you plant in the fall here, and this is one of the big distinctions where it's like, oh, what's out on the internet isn't what applies to the West, right? And there's like almost no resources for anyone who wants to do this to like apply it to Western conditions. Because most guys will plant that stuff in like early September, sometimes even late August in the Midwest and East Coast, because their moisture cycle is from May through September usually. So it's like completely flipped, right? Here we get, I think, 3.5 inches on average from July through September, and they get like 26 to 35 inches of rain. It's like green there in the middle of the summer, which is completely bad. I've been out there for army training and like thinking back, it's like, oh, that's why it sucks there and it's super humid and it rains all the time. And in the middle of the summer, it's like 98 degrees with 100% humidity. So it just flips. So they can plant at that time early and they'll get a lot of growth by hunting season, which typically there starts like October 1st a lot of times. Sometimes it's in September as well, but you're just not getting here. If you plant it right, you can get growth by like late season. But looking forward, and a lot of the stuff I'm producing now in terms of like content, it's like, hey, if you're going to do it out here, spring's the time to do it. And it's basically like you're setting it up in the spring so it'll be. So
you just have to plan way ahead of time here.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. And that's a lot of, I mean, I've had people say, well, like, why is baiting illegal but a food plot's not? And it's like,
It's not
the
the same.
level of input and time and effort and everything, it's not the same.
Yeah, and that is something that I was researching because food plots are legal.
Oh, yeah.
You can hunt over food plots, but you can't hunt over a pile of corn that you just go and dump out.
And also the way that deer interact with that food source between baiting and a food plot is a completely different.
100%.
I mean, this is a completely different spectrum that we're talking on.
Mm-hmm.
Even if you're running a small food plot, I mean, a lot of your food plots are multiple acres even.
Mm-hmm.
But that's just so different than going out there and throwing a bale of hay or alfalfa or a bag of corn or something like that.
Yeah. Yep, way different.
So 2024, this is what, October, I'm assuming, or late September?
Early October is when I planted.
So that's the first time you've ever done anything.
Yeah.
But this was like a last minute ditch effort just because you had time. So
and I wanted to get it started, basically.
Okay.
And background story is, so Lisa, my mother-in-law, Nate met her today. She killed I think it was a 3.5-year-old 4x5 in 2023 over legal pile of bait because she wanted to get into hunting. And then she goes, oh, I don't know if I'll ever do it again, but I just wanted to see if I could. And that year we had a 2.5-year-old buck that was a 6x6 frame with like inside paddles like almost as thick as my palm. Like tiny frame, tiny bases.
He looked like a moose.
Yeah, we called him baby moose. Mm-hmm. And he wasn't the dominant buck on the property, but he was there. And so I was like, okay, we need to like leave this deer alone. We're not shooting this deer. Like we need to see what he turns into. So that was 23, 24. He's a 3.5-year-old. I planted stuff, but it still wasn't like it wasn't enough to go like, oh, we're going to hunt. And I was even like, hey, we need to pass him again this year. But I wanted to see, is this going to pull him into this new plot or whatever? Is it going to change his behavior at all? And he came back and he still wasn't a super high scoring deer, but his frame was super cool. He was the he was the same age as the buck.
There's a tick on me.
Oh my Lord.
There's ticks in here?
No, you probably brought it with you from camping. You just walked in from a camping trip.
Well, I'm in new clothes. All right, you know what?
You were camping today, though, you said, right?
No, I'm back from yesterday.
Oh.
Oh, it's probably just me.
This is kind of a dovetail to this conversation, but how many ticks have you guys seen this year up here?
Like, a lot. This
had a bad year?
This year's been one of the worst.
Okay.
I spent 2 days turkey hunting and had over 30, probably.
I don't know what it is about the property. I don't know if it's the number of turkeys that are on the property, but I cut out roads, brushed in roads with tall grass for like a week straight at the property and didn't get a single tick on me. Didn't see a single tick.
Crazy.
So I have no explanation for it like that's actually founded. But
just consider yourself lucky.
Yeah.
Maybe they just don't like you.
I don't know.
But I wish they didn't like me.
I was fully expecting to be pulling ticks off of me this whole time. So,
anyways, I completely cut you off. I was just so surprised.
Before we go forward, to kind of give us some reference of where you're doing this and like what type of resource you have available to, because you're in a very unique situation here to where you can almost kind of do a lot of this learning and research that you are planning on sharing with people through media at a larger scale than a lot of us probably will be able to do.
Exactly. And I think I am in the extremely unique and fortunate position to be where I'm at and do this. And that's why I was like, who else has, an ability to film? Like I know how to film stuff. I know how to edit stuff. And also has the ability to learn and share this information with people, knowing that, not everyone's going to be in the same situation, but they can apply the same information that I'm learning. And I'm by no means an expert in this stuff, but I feel like I've learned enough in the past 2 years to start sharing like, hey, this is what I'm doing. We'll see if it works. This is what I've learned so far. If you're going to spend time and money on this, here's where to avoid things that you may have seen on the internet or, wherever else. And then this is probably what you should do to help you get started kind of thing. So yeah, Northeast Washington is where my in-laws live, 240 acres. And my father-in-law has all the toys and things that you would need to.
And they live in like hill country type habitat.
Yeah. It's hill country, but it's not wildly aggressive. Like you've got a great variety of.
I mean, there's trees and cover and like just a classic Northeast Washington type of habitat.
Yeah, for sure. And the property has really good bones, but like I said, it was not optimized. The previous owner basically let everything grow up super thick. The timber had nothing growing underneath it. The fields had probably native and non-native grasses and pretty much a couple weeds growing in
It's
them.
basically just like walking out on a piece of public where it just naturally is growing. That's what it used to look like.
Even so, I'd argue that if you're looking at like good managed public land, like things that are like commercially thin,
Oh, yeah.
like you're in way better habitat than even that was.
Like this was just like rotting property essentially.
Yeah, I mean things were growing, but not in a way that benefited wildlife, right? It was kind of a desert. Like we'd have a doe that would like hang out near the house and raise her fawn, and then
Which is interesting because, and I know it looks a lot different now, but it's one of those places that if you were to drive around it, being a public land hunter, you'd look at a spot like this and be like, this has to be like the haven of where all deer live, because you have these aspen patches, you've got running water, you've got, like isolated fields, you've got isolated valley bottoms with surrounding deep timber, but because it was so overgrown, you just didn't have that animal population.
Yeah, exactly. And so in 2 years with like a lot of effort, but basically just working on some, my father-in-law has been clearing a lot of timber for like reducing the fire risk around, because they had a fire pretty nearby a couple years ago, and he's like, I need to clean this up because it's, but just doing that, deer are using that area now from that effort of thinning the timber out, opening up the canopy. And then between that, food plots and like a couple other projects, it's like night and day.
So as of right now, compared to like essentially way back then before you guys did any work, on average, how much more deer do you think? And you can average it, whatever number you want. Like, would you say you're seeing now?
It's going to vary. This spring was the most post an pretty bad EHD year. We had probably 9 or 10 does. They could have been young bucks also in the one of the food plots every night. And I was like, oh, okay, probably 10 deer on 230 acres. And then it was like, oh, I'd drive around, I'd see another group of 7 and then another group of 5. So I think it's probably at that time when our property when the native browse hadn't exploded yet, it was probably 25 to 30 deer on the property at any given time.
Okay.
Yeah. Now with the abundance of browse, they probably have kind of spread out a little bit, because I don't think deer like to be
congregated.
Like I think there's doe family groups, and you'll see that they kind of don't interact, right? The does are kind of finding their safe havens to drop fawns, because they're probably dropping here in the next week or so.
But that's also kind of why you're delving into this, is because even though they spread out during the springtime, a lot of that native browse is bye-bye by the time hunting season comes around.
Exactly. And that's where a food plot in the West, I think, is so... all the guys that do it out in the Midwest are competing with their neighbors who put in food plots. They have agriculture fields that are, cut corn and things that the deer can basically be anywhere that they want, that they feel comfortable. That you can't do a lot unless like a certain scenario exists to create a super good, attractive piece of ground that's going to like pull in deer more so than the other, because it's like kind of all the same, right? Where here, when the native browse dries up in like mid-October and things start, their diet shifts from, forbs and legumes and fungi and lichens and stuff to woody browse. If you have a cereal plot that's green, it's gonna it's gonna have outsized effect here than it would, I think, other places.
Because how many of the neighboring properties are actively doing food plots?
None of them.
And none of them.
Yeah,
right?
that I know of.
I don't think none of them are doing it, because you could drive by and it's like, that's not a food plot.
Yeah.
Like it seems like they till the land and whatnot, but it's not managed for deer.
Exactly. Most of the production in the area is hay,
Yep.
Alfalfa fields or alfalfa grass fields, and that's you'll find those fields and you'll drive by in mid-August when it's green and popping, and they maybe just cut it and there's all that fresh regrowth, and there's like 25 deer in there. That's great if you're hunting in August, but we don't have a season in August, right?
Yeah.
And that's a good early archery. Alfalfa is like super palatable through September, but once it dries up, they're gone, right? They're going to shift to whatever the next best thing is. And that's kind of at the time that you would plant a fall plot or have a spring plot that would be coming back and popping again.
So how many different species of plants or seeds are you planting now?
I don't even know.
Like, so you're planting a lot.
Yeah.
Okay.
And I've kind of there's different takes on it, right? There's kind of the conventional farming focus where people are like, okay, I'm going to do a monocrop. I'm going to use synthetic fertilizers. I'm going to till up the ground. I'm going to do all the things that like a farm would do to produce like tonnage, right? Monocrop agriculture is not, in its conventional form, is not good for the land, right? Mm-hmm. It's done so that that farmer can maybe make a profit, right? And it's also like a mindset that's kind of been built, I think, of I need to produce the most that this land can, right? Mm-hmm. And because of synthetics and herbicides and all these things, you can do that and it looks beautiful. And you just have a perfect field of wheat. We see it all over the place, mm-hmm. fields of wheat that have nothing else in them, right? That's not natural. I've kind of taken the more regenerative, if you want to like put a word on it, of planting blends and then doing both annual plants and perennial plants to kind of create diversity on the land. And since I'm not harvesting, deer don't have a yield cutoff where they're like, we're not going to eat it unless you create this many bushels per acre or whatever, right? It's kind of incidental. Like if it grows poorly, then the deer are still going to eat it. They're just not going to have as much of it, right? Like I haven't used a single ounce of fertilizer, and things are. You saw the plots today. They're creating a lot of biomass, right?
They are, yeah.
And that's in part because the land was sitting fallow with grasses and stuff, and that's good for soil building because it's basically just growing up and dying every year. And that's how you build soil: is you put organic material back into the soil, and the soil microbes feast on that and then create soil. Soil's not just dirt; it's a whole lattice of.
There's a lot of decomposition.
But there's the microbes that eat that decomposition interact with a microbial or a mycorrhizal layer, so like fungus.
It's
fungus.
Kind of like the human gut flora.
Exactly.
Honestly, it's just in the realm of dirt
and
earth.
Yeah, it's the same thing that every life is diverse, and when you put a bunch of synthetic inputs and make things so it suppresses that microbial activity, like if you were drinking or eating a bunch of junk all the time, your gut's not going to be healthy, right? Same thing with the soil. So I'm planting things in blends because if you look at like nature, it's diverse, right? And those plants feed each other through the root and mycorrhizal network. So like a grass species scavenges nitrogen. It takes it up in order to grow. But when it dies, it releases that back through that decomposition. Legumes fix that nitrogen. So they actually pull nitrogen out of the atmosphere. And on their root system, they nodulate, and the bacteria in the soil allow that interplay to happen between a legume and a grass. So that legume's fixing the nitrogen into the soil. The grass is scavenging that nitrogen. Things like brassicas, which is like radishes, turnips, anything that you think of that's like kale, that's all the same family of plants. They're just bred for different expression. Like basically everything. It's hard to explain, but those are all brassica,
which is a super popular food plot.
Yes,
in the Midwest.
Yeah, it is, and I can kind of tell you what I told you earlier. But those will break compaction. They have a deep taproot that can reach really low, and they break up the soil. And when that big taproot, like a radish, they can be like this big as the taproot, right? A foot long and 2 inches thick. That's pushing through that soil layer. Once it decomposes, it leaves a void that other plants can then scavenge the decomposition.
So you're obviously doing that process by letting things be as natural as possible for the longevity of the property.
Yep.
How long do you think it takes for this process to be able to be at a level or at a health where your soil is basically able to just kind of leave it on its own and it's able to produce stuff?
It depends on your starting point. Like if you have super degraded soils, then your first year it's going to probably look pretty poor.
What did you start out with?
Well, I actually just I should have done a soil test when I first started, but actually, so the little meadow we first drove into has like really good soil because it was basically a native meadow that had grasses and all that diversity already, and it was doing that process of dying over and over. So the soil's like black. It has really high organic matter. It has a lot of nutrients. But then like the field down at the gate, which you've driven through, it's basically been mowed, and it's just not as like it wasn't putting as much biomass, which wasn't building the soil like the other place was. So that soil isn't as good. And it varies kind of throughout the property. The pH levels are different, which is the acidity level, which has a large part to play on how. But overall, the soils are pretty solid. And even 2 years in, like I said, that first year when I just planted the cereal rye, it was super sparse and whatever. And we had a lot of weed competition come back in. But now it's like the biomass at even the field just out of the little meadow. It's like an 1.5 acre plot. The clover's like 1.5 foot high, and like the leaves are like giant. And so I think it's probably 3 years you're going to basically be at a point where you're building soil.
It's crazy because the areas that you were showing me today do not look, so this is close to where we live. This is close to where we're recording this. It's a very different landscape than what our property is here. So here, my wife and I, we live on 20 acres here. And we have about 17 of those acres are wooded, and 5 of those 17 acres are young lodgepoles, super thick, just impenetrable woods. And then about 12 of those 17 acres are kind of that mixed older growth, multi-species with, there's not a super strong forest canopy, so there's undergrowth. And then 3 acres are open. And what I've noticed over the last 4 years here in this acreage around the house and the shop and below that's open is it's gone from what seems like a nicer soil, grasses growing in the spring, to now, and it's actually a much bigger area than 3 acres because we share 5 or 7 acres over here with our neighbor that they have. It's just become, and I don't know what the species is, but it's like that eastern, southeastern Washington dry, just empty dirt by 3 weeks from now, probably, unless this rain keeps up like it is. It's just going to be this kind of almost stick-like browse type brush.
Yeah.
And that is a very, very different look than these food plots that you have that are 2 to 3 years in, just a couple miles away, that are right now knee-high, thigh-high, just thick. I mean, really thick, like wading through it. It had recently rained, and you wade through it and you just get soaked.
Yeah. What you're talking about is successional growth, which is another key indicator. Like, we as hunters know when we're looking for deer habitat, burns, clear cuts, all of that is disturbance, right? Unless you're throwing out a corn pile or know that a deer's using an old growth cedar thicket as like a transition zone, it's probably not a smart place to hunt because there's nothing growing in the bottom there. There's nothing really providing bedding cover because you think, oh, it's thick and dark, a deer would like to hang out in here, but that's not the case. They like stuff that they can lay down in and see, but also obscures them, right? And so that early successional growth, if you think about it, like if you burned a forest to the ground, cut all the trees down, it would be grass first, right? Then within a couple years, you start getting shrubs and woody browse growing up. Then you might have some seedlings of trees of lodgepole pine and ponderosa pine start growing up. And then underneath that canopy, you get firs, Douglas fir, white fir, grand fir, whatever, start growing up underneath that. Then the cedars, once it gets shaded enough, the cedars start growing. And then you get like white pine, cedar, late successional growth. And that's the end of that cycle until this fire comes and takes it all away, right? Which is a natural cycle that we've kind of broken, right? In this area, I think the historic fire succession was like 5 to 7 years you would get a fire. And it would clear it out, right? And then it kind of varies because there's different timber types that will, adjust to fire differently. Like lodgepoles, the regrowth value of lodgepole is like incredibly high. It'll just grow super thick and heavy. But like that lodgepole thicket you're talking about across the road, there's nothing growing underneath that right now because it's creating that successional pyramid for that next tree species to grow up underneath it, right? And so the earliest successional growth that you can get is the best deer habitat in general. So like I said, fires that, you get all those fire weeds and all that, the browse and forbs and stuff that come out post that. That's why we find animals in that, because that new growth is the most palatable and attractive to a deer in that early successional stage. So basically I'm applying that to the property in areas where you still need to have like late successional, like cedar thickets will provide thermal cover, right? Especially in low bottoms, so they can stay cool in there if they need to, if it gets too hot. Or in the wintertime, it actually stays warmer in those little thermal hubs. So it does provide value, and you need diversity. But in general, like a lodgepole stand that's nothing's growing in it, if you thin that out and have shrubs and, ceanothus and nine bark and mock orange and all these different shrub species that I'm like learning to identify on our property, snowberry, all these things start growing up, the deer are going to move in. They're going to find it, right?
I don't know if you know the answer to this, but I'm just curious. Like, if you had like a 1 acre piece of land, what is the ideal percentage of food and then cover?
So a lot of people say like 5 to 8% food plot to the rest native habitat.
Native just meaning native food,
to that region.
Resources, and then just bedding cover and stuff like that?
Yeah, and this is, if you want to optimize it, you'd probably have, and again, it's going to vary per property, but I would probably go, if you have tillable land, something you can plant into that's flat. I think that here, that 8% of your property, which in a lot of places, like a 20-acre parcel, and I think this is where it can apply to anyone. You don't have to have 250 acres, 240 acres to do this. If you have 20 acres and you plant 1 or 2 acres of food plots, that can be the difference of, pulling deer in. But then let's just use Nate's property like he explained it as an example, right? He has about 3 acres of native prairie. It's not really flat though, right?
No.
It's kind of rolling.
It's like on the side of a hill.
Yeah. What you could do is transition that into, because it's in that process where you said brush is starting to grow up. You might have some small ponderosa pines or lodgepoles that are growing up in it, right? You could clear that out. You could, plant a perennial forb food plot. It doesn't have to be a food plot, but if you just want to better the habitat, have deer use it more, you could do a perennial or an annual. But in the case, since it's not tillable, I'd probably go for a perennial that you could broadcast. So you could just walk through and put seed out, right? Like an alfalfa, sainfoin, native wildflowers, things like that the deer could eat on. And then you would get rid of some of that invasive or, native bunch grass stuff that browns out super fast that the deer are only maybe going to nip at in early spring or right when it starts growing in the fall for like a small period. If you adjusted that to that and then took the more open, there's a thing called basal rate, which is the density of the timber on, which it's like a measurement. I don't actually know what it is, but it's basically the harvestable timber by volume in a given space, right?
Okay.
So if you reduce the basal rate, so you're letting a lot of light in and it's selecting for species that benefit deer, which when Nate and I were on the property, we drove past a larch or a tamarack that a bear had just killed. It just peeled it like this week.
Oh, really?
Yeah, it's completely ringed the tree. The tree's going to die now. But in my opinion, if you have larch growing on your property, I would select for that. Again, you need diversity. I wouldn't clear cut everything except for the tamarack, but things like aspen, larch, Doug fir, ponderosa pine, if you thinned it out to the point where you have sunlight coming in and growing up that understory, that's going to do more for, deer cover and deer browse in the wintertime than anything else. And kind of swing this back to, because not everyone's going to listen to this and go, I'm going to do a food plot or whatever. The area I hunt on public land was selectively thinned for aspen, larch, and Doug fir. Heavily thinned. Like it's almost a clear cut, but they left those species. And 2 years later, like the aspen that's regenerating is like so thick that, and the deer are browsing it like crazy. And it's thousands of acres of this, right? And we have probably 4 to 8 bucks that are 4.5 years or older in this little zone.
So in layman terms, tell me what the primary benefits of having a diversity of these big trees are. Why is it more beneficial to have like five aspens and like 5 ponderosas versus just 10 aspens? Like what's the benefit of those other tree species that are there?
I don't know if I can speak to the scientific benefit, but if you want one, you can harvest that timber down the road. If you thin it out, that timber is going to grow up and then that succession starts, but you can get harvestable timber. Larch and Doug fir are some of the more, and unless you're managing for like cedars, which is that last level I was talking, cedar is the most valuable timber, but again, it's not good for deer. So if you want to do deer habitat, that's where like a grand fir, which you see a lot, it's the one with flat needles. So a Doug fir has needles all around the branch, where a grand fir has flat needles. Those grow up like crazy. They're super productive trees, but the timber value is pretty low. So you can leave a couple of them, but the Doug, so it kind of, you can get in the weeds on the timber thing. I just think one, larch is super beneficial because it's deciduous and it loses its needles, which allows more light into the canopy and leaves it at that kind of earlier succession.
So in a way, different trees, because they operate differently, they provide certain benefits that a tree might lack or another species might lack.
Yeah.
Okay.
Where like if you have a bunch of grand fir growing up, within a couple years, it's going to shade out that
Everything's
canopy.
dead.
I feel like something that's really valuable here that's kind of beyond the food plot is, what was the cycle you were talking about that starts with grasses, and what's the word you used?
Successional growth.
Successional growth. So if you look at successional growth, I think a lot of people think about food plots with, say, whitetail hunting as a single food source for them to come feed on equals more deer, or no food plots, they're feeding somewhere else, less deer. And they're not thinking about this growth cycle, and they're not thinking about it in this frame of reference that quote-unquote food plots are just one very small portion of this successional growth that is modified by many other things. That you can have effects of food plots, that you can also have the effects of going out and just cutting down underbrush or thinning out an area and allowing native growth to come up in that area, which for this area of the state, I mean, obviously, if you're hunting public land, know what you're allowed to do as far as any sort of thinning or broadcasting seeds on public land. But there are ways to, definitely improve deer environment in these smaller habitats outside of doing food plots on massive chunks of private.
100%. Yeah. And that's why it's the whole picture. Like I saw a video actually recently that the Wyoming Fish and Game put out where they were talking about mahogany and how beneficial it is for deer, but they were actually going through and just like, it was like a weed whacker with a blade on it and cutting the tops off of the mahogany, because the deer utilize the new growth off of the mahogany more than like an old super tall. They may nip the ends, but that flush of regrowth. Today I showed Nate a elderberry tree that I basically used a forestry mulcher to like take the top off, and the new green elderberry shoots, every single top was nipped off of that new green elderberry. And with things like snowberry, and there's another plant that I showed him where it's like every single tip had been bitten off. It was just from the disturbance that I created by mulching and clearing that area, and it came back up. It's nothing that I planted. It was just a native thing that came up. And it's feeding deer now, right? They're eating it. They were selecting for that over stuff in the food plot because it's, it's new, fresh growth. So like if you have a brush hog and you want to, and you see like a bunch of native shrubs, if you go through and clear that out, the deer may not be standing there in late October or November, just eating in that like they would a food plot, but it's going to be benefiting your deer herd and making the deer more healthy on your property. So,
I think one thing that I've learned throughout the last years of specifically with whitetail learning is I've always been very drawn and falsely drawn to these thick timber bottoms. So you're out in public land, you have these clear cuts. You can have clear cuts that are cut down pretty low. Like you can look at it and see that there's no deer in the clear cut, right? And then you have these guts in between where because of, riparian zones that they're not going to do any sort of foresting in. And so you have these buffer zones on the edges of riparian, creeks. You go down in there. It's kind of open. It's cool in the summer. There's a water source right there. And my thought, years back and until a couple of years ago was like, this is where the big bucks are going to live. When in the reality is there's no food in there. And the cover, like you said, is pretty open. They're covered from the clear cut. But when you're in there, you can see, and this is something with deer that's might be very different than elk. For instance, your elk bedding area that you know so well, Smong, is pretty open, right?
Oh, yeah.
And it's that old growth timber, but we're talking something different there.
It's not a hard fast rule that they won't use that to bed in, right? The deer are gonna be where they are, right? And if it provides that level where they can, get the wind right and see where they want to see and feel protected enough, they may be using it, right? And I think the key word that you used in your observation was edge, right? An edge for a whitetail deer is everything, right? They're an edge habitat species. They live on the edge, right? It's that transition zone between cover and food that is so important to how a deer moves and how a deer feeds from, sun up to sundown throughout the night, right? That edge is what dictates that, right? And so I think that's what your observation was, right? Food here, cover here. There's some nuances there that probably dictate what the activity you're seeing in that area. But that's kind of the key. And my new channel is called Western Edge, partly because of that, because it's the one I'm trying to help give people an edge. But I think that edge habitat is kind of the key thing.
That is a great name.
Thanks.
That is such a good name.
Yeah.
With that, what are you doing? Do you have a channel? Are you backlogging? What's your...
I just started posting stuff to Instagram. I don't have it on my phone. I've kind of been off Instagram and social media for the past 4 years for the most part. And I think it being on my phone is just what always kind of pulled me back to it when I would get rid of it. So I don't have it on my phone, but I have it on my desktop. So I get on, I do everything, and I'm not drawn to it, but I have gone on and started posting some stuff. So I've done that, and then I have a YouTube channel. By the time this gets released, it'll be within a couple weeks or maybe a month from starting to drop videos. And I'm basically going to try to do a video a week I have like 40 or so video ideas that I've been working on.
That's a lot of videos.
Yeah. There's a lot of content.
And you're just taking... This is because there was a lack of media for what you were looking for in what we're doing over here.
Yeah, and I just feel like I'm in the position to provide that and take people along for the ride. I don't want to be like, I know everything, I just want to show people what I'm doing. Yeah. Hey, it might be something you can do too. Here's the takeaway.
Well, this is a perfect example because, and I know not like, obviously like very few people have access to 240 acres. Not many people have access to 20 acres, which is what I have, and I'm extremely blessed to have. But I did this, when we moved in here, I was like, 20 acres, not enough to hold its own population of whitetails, but maybe enough to kind of optimize to bring more deer in, to make more deer pass through, help the neighbors out. But I went on and I could find practically no information of doing this type of whitetail habitat optimization in the scope of Western states.
Exactly. Yeah.
And so when talking to you about it, it's been very intriguing because, I kind of feel like I'm cheating a little bit because you've been spending the last two years doing all this footwork, and then
that's what I want to do, right?
Yeah,
it's for people who've maybe thought about it and not pulled the trigger because it's a daunting task.
It is extremely daunting.
Yeah.
In fact, every single time I looked into it, I ended up just kind of getting discouraged, being like, there's too many different species of things I could plant. There's too many different styles of planting. Do I spend resources to try to clear out more open area, or do I, try to plow it and level it because I have to use a drill to seed stuff? Or can there was 10,000 different factors where I was like, I don't know what to do. And I was like, I'm just going to keep hunting my spots in public land.
Yeah. And I want to provide that level of, if you have a tractor and, a brush hog that you can put on your tractor, from that level, or even maybe less than that, you got to rent something and you're just going to broadcast. Like, you can't do what the Midwest, you can't go out, till your land, broadcast brassicas like we talked about in August and have anything grow. We get the least amount of rain we get in this region in August. They get, 5-7 inches of rain in August. They can grow that stuff and have it be a food plot. So if you go online, I need to plant a brassica plot in late July, mid-August. You do that out here. You till up your ground, which is going to be dust, and then you seed into dust.
Yeah.
It's not going to grow, right?
Yeah.
And so there is a way to do something to get a value, and I think that's what I want to kind of explore. So
with this food plot, you're doing it for deer. Are you yourself going to end up hunting it, or are you just simply doing it strictly for the project and learning?
It's mostly the project of learning. If there's like a masher, just giant buck that, we're chasing, I still would prefer Dave or Lisa to kill it. But, if it's late archery and I'm like, this deer's going to die next year, then maybe I'll ask if I can.
So
I can
obviously
hunt it,
with that, you kind of hinted on it, but even though you're talking about food plots and you're talking about things that you're planting that don't necessarily grow naturally here, just from observing the way you're talking in the conversation and the topics that we've been going over, there's a lot of similarity in the aspect of technique, not necessarily the exact food browse itself, where you can kind of take what you're learning on private land and then translate that over to public land. Because
100%.
a lot of your archery hunting, if not all of it, for the past 5 years or so, has been on public land.
Yeah.
Right? And you kind of hinted on it earlier where you said, like, where you're hunting these bucks on public land, there's a lot of thinning stuff that resemble what you would do on a food plot. And so tell us some of the things that you think you have really benefited from learning on a food plot that you're like, wow, like I should do this on public land.
Well, it's more how we've been scouting. Me and my buddy, JP is a buddy of mine. He lives north of here, and he's a fish bio for the Colville Indian tribe, but he's like, when I've been in Hawaii, he's been the guy putting out cameras and scouting.
He's been doing all the dirty work.
Doing all the dirty work for me. I'll send him. I would send him like a box of like 5 cameras and batteries and like, hey, put these out, dude. And so we've kind of been learning this area together. You actually are pretty close to where I almost tried to get Samong to come out to a late season. He put up a camera or two, and I think he got some decent bucks on that.
There were some good bucks,
ridge. Yeah.
really good bucks. And I was like 100 yards off the road.
Yeah. Yeah.
So that's saying a lot in it of itself.
Yeah, that unit in particular has escapement, which I think if any of the mule deer march stuff that you had those guys on, they've found pockets of deer where there's escapement. And where you get escapement, you get age class distribution. And that's what we've been looking for when we've and it just kind of sprung on us. Because when we baited, right, it was like, okay, a place you could put up a stand or a blind that you can get into, and the bait would just pull whatever deer were in the area to that bait pile, right?
Yep.
You may have to compete with other bait piles, but in general, it was like there wasn't a lot of thought going into how would I hunt these deer if I didn't have bait. It was just like, are there deer there? Are they hitting my bait?
I hope
daylight?
they come in.
They come in, yeah, exactly. There was not a lot of thought going, and you definitely could take it there because it wasn't as easy as I thought it was going to be.
No, I think a lot of people undergo this idea that if you just throw a pile of corn out, like every deer's going to show up. Yeah. It's not like that at all.
And then trying to kill like a 4.5-year-old plus deer.
Yeah, when they're all
is
alert.
The next level because they know the bait, right? And then you're like, okay, well, Troy Pottinger, started basically when I started hunting whitetails was right when he kind of started doing podcasts. I think Dan Staten was the first guy he did a podcast with. And then all these people heard that podcast and like, this guy's a ninja with whitetails. And scrapes are a thing, and that was that kind of like took it over because I shot a private land whitetail deer when I was in college south of Spokane on my roommate's parents' property. It was like 10 acres. I threw out apples and killed like a 4.5 or 5.5-year-old 145-inch whitetail, which I was stoked on, right? But there wasn't like a lot of challenge there. So I was like, okay, next year I want to do the public land thing. It was just like an opportunity thing that led to that hunt. But I wanted to apply that to public land whitetail. You go out, you do the bait, and then I killed, it was probably a 1.5-year-old 4x4, just a really small 4x4. Then I was in Hawaii and I'd come back and, we'd have these great deer on camera, but it was like, you basically need time to just like put your head to the grindstone and sit in the tree and get the wind right. And then maybe you could have a good chance at killing a mature deer. But when I had only limited time coming back from Hawaii, it was like that 2-point meat buck was looking pretty sweet because my freezer was empty. So
Yeah.
I wasn't really able to go down that rabbit hole. And now without baiting, we have this incredible area where we have really awesome deer. Like 3 years ago, JP pulled the camera like the year after we hunted it, and he's got to be at least mid 150s, probably a 160 whitetail. And it's like, that's an incredible deer for that area. I know there's bigger ones, but it's like, that's probably the,
He's got respect for his own.
Yeah, exactly. And it's like, wow, we have multiple other mature deer that are like coming back year after year. We still need to hunt this area and figure it out. And last year we went back and I got my ass handed to me.
Because of the no baiting rule?
No baiting. It was big woods, 4,500 feet, trying to kill a deer and be in a tree that he's going to walk by in giant country. And that's where you have to put this hat on of what is the habitat? What are they eating? Why are they here? This is the bedding zone. Am I going to hunt the edge of the bedding? Can I get in? What's my access into this area like? And that has, between the habitat work and pivoting that, it's like, now I'm going to hunt muzzleloader season this year.
Mm-hmm.
Because we had a mock scrape that these pretty decent bucks were hitting in daylight in muzzleloader season, like consistently. They were there like a couple days. And it's like, am I going to choose to hunt when the flurry, like the rut's great for a rifle hunt because the deer are more visible. They're chasing does, they're more active during daytime, but they're not patternable.
Mm-hmm.
And that's what I found out. Like, I sat at a mock scrape that I had kind of on the edge of a bedding zone. I kind of tried to figure out access. I kind of was blowing them out the way I tried. I sent JP in there. He basically almost had an opportunity. I think one of those mature deer that was like coming down. He said it came off the top of the ridge on this edge, right? Clear cut, just been thinned and then burned. So there's a lot of like fresh regrowth and it's looking better this year. And it was coming down that edge. He said he worked a scrape on like just above him and then cut out into the timber and he just didn't get a shot at him. But
ouch.
But the fact that he had that opportunity like goes to show that we're paying attention to the right things and it's possible. But am I going to be more successful just picking a time when they're more patternable over a mock scrape? Like Pottinger has these, these hot does that he follows and knows when they're coming into estrus and knows that buck's going to lock down on that deer. Because I would have like a mature buck hit a mock scrape and then disappear for 5 or 6 days. And that's what happened to me. I sat that stand for like 5 days. And then I like literally fresh home from the hunt, and I get a cell cam picture, and he's standing right in daylight, right underneath the stand, hitting that mock scrape. So I haven't been able to be successful due to the application, but I think, one, just being more aware of the habitat, why this area is good, what they're eating during that, paying attention to the browse, right?
Mm-hmm.
What are they eating during October or September, whenever you're hunting, and identifying like, this is the destination they're trying to get to. Am I going to try to cut them off? Am I going to try to kill them in this little zone? I think that's where
I think that's the big point in the correlation, whether it's a food plot or just hunting big natural woods, is these deer are, no matter what time of the season it is, there's a purpose as to where they are.
100%.
Now, the food plot might just be that you kind of get to control where you want to plant a certain food source, and so it's easier for you to work that in your favor, right? Because you can go to the big woods on public land and be like, wow, this is a really good spot, and you look around you, you're like, man, the wind sucks to sit here.
Yeah.
Like, there's no way to kill a deer here unless I'm getting winded.
Yep.
Whereas with the food plot, because you get to control everything, you can be like, I'm going to plant this here because the wind, I know, is not going to blow there.
Yep.
Right? So that's kind of like the advantages of having a food plot versus hunting big woods. But the idea is the same.
Yeah.
It's that you're just trying to figure out what that deer is going to do in that area, whether he's feeding or what travel route he's taken. Mm-hmm. And I feel like with your food plot, even though I don't have access to making a food plot of my own, the big takeaways I'm doing here is like, you're paying a lot more attention to details, where I feel like somebody who doesn't do that, do a food plot per se, they're kind of dismissing those details.
100%. Yeah.
Right? Because back then, like when I hunted with a rifle, it was just I'm going to sit on this road,
Where I can
overlook
see
a
stuff.
giant clear cut.
Yeah.
I don't know why they're there, but there's a clear cut.
Yeah.
Right? But now it's like, okay, if you have 5 clear cuts, okay, now what's the surrounding edges around each clear cut?
Mm-hmm.
And what's the pressure like, right? Is one's farther from the road, one's closer to the road. Like, what's the advantages of sitting this cut over that cut?
Mm-hmm.
And I feel like that's the biggest takeaway that I've gotten so far with this conversation is like you start paying attention to way smaller details where I would otherwise just kind of disregard.
Mm-hmm.
And then on top of that, you pay attention not to smaller details, but the right details regarding your species you're going after. I mean, we're pretty heavily on whitetail here, but that I would say goes the same for like elk, where they're going to, depending on time of season and what they're up to, they're going to pivot to certain areas depending on where you're hunting as well.
Yep.
Mule deer's probably the same thing as well.
Yeah.
Right.
And I think there's places around the states, like I said, I'm doing it in a whitetail area, but people like in the Great Basin, you guys were just talking about going on a hunt that I listened to, that you were seeing 2 points and 2 points only.
Oh, yeah. A lot.
And because there's no escapement, right? Those deer can't go anywhere where they can hide, right?
Yep.
They go on to the next property, they get shot on that property. As soon as they're legal, they're dead.
Yep.
Right? If someone out in the Great Basin there's plenty of farmers that have hundreds of acres. If they plant something, cover for the deer to bed in, because if they just have, edge or giant wheat fields, but they have no edge habitat, you just have to plant some trees, in a zone where you're not actively farming, and then you're immediately holding more deer. That wheat gets cut, it's gone. If you plant, that fresh wheat, that's a cereal, right? They're going to be eating those small shoots. But if you just did, a small food plot that's going to have a diversity, clover and wheat and other stuff you can hold those deer on your property. And if you don't pressure it, those deer are going to get older. So you can now start to manage for distributed age class in an area that traditionally you wouldn't see that because I've seen, if you drive kind of into the scablands, right? Mm-hmm. You find a alfalfa field in the middle of the scablands.
There's about 500 deer in there.
There's 500 deer. But what happens to them when that last cutting happens and the alfalfa dries out? Those deer go everywhere. They go where they feel comfortable and where they can feed on something. If you drilled in, cool season, like a cereal, into that alfalfa, which you could do, and have it grow up and actually get a more robust cutting out of that in the first cutting to make hay. And it's actually a strategy used by hay producers, right? Then you have green growth that goes past that, and those deer stay there, right? Mm-hmm. So there's a way to apply this to mule deer or blacktails or whatever.
Are you legally allowed to plant stuff on public land?
No, I don't think
you
so.
can't?
No.
Okay.
No.
I was just wondering. I was like, oh, that kind of seems like an easy way to go.
Yeah, but you can, the amount of places I see clover now or, wild thing or even non-native stuff that in an area that's disturbed that for whatever reason that seed was carried on a vehicle or whatever, where you can find little zones where there's, stuff that deer will be eating on. It's surprising how much when you're looking for it, you find.
What's your thoughts on fruits for plots?
One of the best things you can do.
Really?
Yeah, I planted 9 apple trees this year. We had 2 they're not crab apples, but they're not like a great apple. It's just kind of what's grown along a creek. It's not a huntable spot, but we get a ton of deer and bears on, these apple trees when they're dropping fruit. And they only drop fruit, I think, like October to maybe like the 3rd week of October. That's kind of like when they mature. So I did a bunch of research. I found an early maturing apple variety, a middle maturing apple variety, and a late maturing apple variety, and planted each of those species in clusters of 3 at each stand and hunting location on our property. So now we'll have fruit from early to mid-August through basically early November.
Huh.
And they're also awesome apples that we will be able to pick and eat if we want. So bears are going to die is basically what the outcome of that is.
And then they're going to come get dry aged in this cooler.
Exactly, because I was telling Nate, dry aged bear sounds like the next level.
No, the reason why I bring it up is because we're talking about food plots here, right? But then all over the state, we have a lot of orchards.
Oh yeah.
And I hear a lot of stories from people who, not hunters, but people who work those orchards where they're like, dude, you'll walk down an orchard and you'll be jumping deer and sometimes even bears.
Yeah.
out of the orchards, and they're like, sometimes it's pretty scary when you're out there by yourself and there's a bear in the middle of your orchard.
Yeah, I think so. Being from Yakima, that's like the biggest.
That's
apple
the heart of
producing.
Yakima.
Yeah, and for the most part, there's a elk fence that prevents deer and elk from. But there's always kind of
There's always nuances.
the ones that slip. No, there are deer and elk that and they give depredation permits to prevent the damage. But I think it had to have been 10 years ago. There was a 700-pound cinnamon phase black bear that was hit by a car eating in an orchard.
I think that thing made the news.
Yeah,
it did.
It did.
Yeah.
So even a 300-pound apple fattened bear sounds pretty dang tasty to me. So yeah, I mean for soft mass, anything like you can do pears, and then there's also hard mass. There's hazelnuts, walnuts, acorns. We don't have a lot of that, but it's also an
I've heard
incredible
white
food
oak
source.
acorns are like the
Crack.
best for a white-tailed deer.
Yeah.
Have you thought about doing that?
They take forever to grow.
Oh.
So I have
Okay.
in areas like along the Columbia Basin for blacktails. In that region, they're kind of like the bench legs. And they even grow further west where it is a true blacktail. I'm sure if anyone hunts that area, they'll tell you like this is where you need to be, like when the acorns are dropping, because even Midwest, right? People will say their deer disappear because if they have any timber, or because a lot of the timber in the Midwest and East Coast are oak trees, which produce red white oaks. The variety we have out here is a Western white oak, but they'll actually not eat anything in the food plots. They'll just spend 2 or 3 weeks in the forest eating all the acorns because it's that high of a value to them in that period. It helps them fatten up. And that's another thing that we don't have out here, putting deer into incredible body condition going into winter, right? We don't have that. We don't have in most parts of the state, we don't have an agriculture source or a native mast or food or browse that is putting deer super fat going into the rut and then going into winter, right? We have the trophy potential.
Oh, yeah.
There's no doubt. You look at the Colville and the Spokane Indian Reservation. I was at a taxidermist like a month ago, and it's probably, if it was a typical, it'd probably be 180-inch whitetail, but it was just a freak, and it was like throwing stuff everywhere. Oh, where'd that come off of? Oh, the res. Well, what is the res doing? They're not spraying clear cuts as much, so they're letting native browse regrow. They're burning all the time, and they're doing a lot of logging activity, which has kind of been suppressed over the past. Like when Troy Pottinger first started hunting back in, or when he was a kid, right? That's when Idaho was at its logging heyday. Mm-hmm. Those were natural food plots. The most amount of early successional growth that you had. So you probably had the most amount of feed. Like those deer had the potential to get giant, right? You look at like the Res Bucks and Bull page where they, one, I think there's only 8,500 Colville native residents that live on the Colville Indian Reservation. So you think about one, not everyone hunts on that land. Mm-hmm. So they could kill as many deer as they want and they're not going to outpace the resource in the age class. So they're getting escapement just naturally from what the pressure is put on the resource. And when you get age class and habitat management, you get giant deer, and they get multiple, 170-plus inch whitetails, giant 200-inch mule deer, and a couple 400-inch bulls every year. Mm-hmm. So Washington, you can't say Washington doesn't, because that's the same land, right?
Yeah.
It's just managed differently. And that's like states when they're managed differently. Like, again, I keep going back to Iowa. I saw a clip today by a guy named Skip Sly. He's kind of like one of the big Iowa food plot habitat guys out there. And he goes, every other state could be Iowa. Most states have better habitat and better deer herds than Iowa does. Iowa just manages for distributed age class and harvests in that area more does than they do bucks. So their buck to doe ratios are super even, basically. Mm-hmm. So that's the state everyone wants to go hunt for whitetails because they have a good shot at killing a 160-plus inch whitetail even on public land, right? It's all up to the managing agency and how they apply pressure to a system. But there's nothing inherently keeping deer from reaching that level of growth other than the habitat and age, right? Because if the does are healthy and they go into the lactation period in super good condition, then those fawns are healthy, and those fawns can express their full genes. And they do, just like, Brock and them. He found a 190 plus inch mule deer in a super low density mule deer zone, but in an area where they're not getting hunted, right? And he's seen that age class distribution. I have, 160, 170 inch bucks in this area. Well, they're not getting killed. Some of them are, right? Some of them are dying to cats, but there's enough of them getting out of the hunting season and weathering the native pressure, the cats, the winter, whatever. And then you see growth years, and that's where it's highly predicated on what the winter cycle and the precipitation cycle in that growth period. He'll have a deer that's giant one year, and then it goes into the next year, like 2015 winter kill, right? I would say pre-2015 was a different productivity level for the state of Washington, right? Prior to that, for whatever reason, hunting pressure, escapement, I think they went into the 2015 season. During the 2014 surveys, they were seeing more 4-point bucks than they had ever seen in that year, right? 2015, you have a drought year, one of the worst droughts we've ever had.
Massive wildfires.
Massive. I was a wildland firefighter that year, and it was crazy, right?
The whole state was on fire.
Exactly. So you have deer going into summer not being able to put on fat, right? Going into winter with no fat stores and no winter range because it's all burnt up.
Yeah.
There's nothing growing there, right? And then 16 and 17, you have no change in management. So people are still going out to hunt. They're still only restricted by a 3-point minimum for mule deer at least. And for a number of years after that, I would say even till this day, we haven't recovered to pre-2015 levels.
I don't think so.
Yeah. And anyone and I didn't really even hunt before then, but you just look at harvest data, all of the metrics show that the herds were more productive at that time. And there's a number of factors, right? But it's all management based. And if you can do on your property something to achieve the goals, like if you just want to, let's say kill 3-year-olds, you have a bunch of, kids that hunt your property, and you want it to be a base for continuing the hunting tradition, right? You can manage it for maximum number of bucks to hit 3.5, and you shoot them, which is basically kind of the system we're in now. 2.5 is kind of the cutoff but even for whitetails, there's no antler point restriction, so you're basically killing any deer. But you could protect, basket 4-point and unders and say, hey, once it, reaches its ears, we can shoot it, right? That's all up to your management in a private setting. And that's where I think this discussion that you guys had a couple weeks ago about the permit only is stemming from, because when they look at surveys of Washington hunters, people want to see and kill big deer, and they want to kill deer, right? You can't have that cake and eat it too with an over-the-counter system. It's not really the ideal for the number of hunters we have in Washington State, right? And the big fear is that it goes away like spring bear, which is a completely, real fear that Washington hunters have, because it's another lever and thing that the commission could pull. Because that discussion point that was brought up came out of the department organically. The department hasn't been the source of Washington hunter ills, up until this point. Generally, they've pushed back against the commission when they've come up with their lunacy, right? But is it another tool for the commission to, get rid of stuff? And that's a real fear. So I don't blame anyone for going, hey, no, this is a bad idea. But for productivity of Washington's herds, if you can trust the management decisions by the department, which there's probably going to be some that are idiotic and some that are, that make sense. But it is a lever that they can pull to adjust to things like a bad winter. Where on our property, if we get smoked by a bad winter or EHD, it's going to be like, hey, we're not going to harvest any does. We're not harvesting any does now because we're not at a point where we think we need it. But if we get to a point where the food plots start, getting mowed down because there's so many deer on the property and they're over pressuring the habitat, and the habitats, there's a browse line and, whatever else, sure, we'll start killing a bunch of does. But we also have a huge population of cougars and mountain lions that are pretty much doing that already. So
yeah, no, I think it's true across the board, as you've already said. Management, when done right, is your best tool to manage trophy potential as well as numbers, right? the hard part with, in this case, over-the-counter systems is like you can't really manage every single herd in every single region under one rule.
Yeah,
because it's different.
It's a landscape level decision.
And so that's one of the things that we brought up in our podcast when I was saying that you can't have a blanket statement to say if you're going to go into a draw system, you can't just say we're changing everything into a draw, but we're still undergoing this one baseline of a rule.
Yeah.
Now, the advantage of like you having a food plot or private property per se is like even if the state agency doesn't allow for a certain objective that you might want in yourself, you can, in a micro level, micromanage that specific property with that specific herd to what you want to hunt.
Exactly.
Right? Now,
depending on what your neighbors, if it's not big enough property, if your neighbors are shooting every antler deer they see, it's going to be real tough to get a deer to maturity.
That's what the point of the food plot is. You're trying to maximize deer on your property so that they don't cross over to the neighbor and get shot.
Yeah, exactly.
Like you're trying to, one, not necessarily just attract them, but also to hold them.
Yeah.
Especially during the time of the year where you're trying to actually shoot them.
Exactly.
Right? Because in the springtime, like I don't really care where they go, but in October, November, or September even, that's when you want them on the property.
Yeah.
And so you can maximize that by just outworking your neighbor per se.
Yeah.
Right? But again, not everybody has access to acres of property or private land per se. But to your point, if done right, even on public land, if you're able to study that specific habitat, which is why I always bring it up to people. It's like people just say like, I want to go shoot a big buck. And it's like, at the end of the day, there's a big bucks everywhere you look. You just really have to find that one pocket.
It's the escapement, right?
Exactly. And so it's
that's what saved Washington from having in an over-the-counter system of having big deer and big elk still, right? We talked about the Great Basin, right? There's a ton of 2 points there because every 3 point that survives gets shot. But then you look at the desert unit, which is the same exact habitat, same exact landscape, but they manage it under a permit only, no general season, and you get, maybe not now, but there's been times historically where there was always 180.
I mean, you're getting record bucks out of that one unit.
Yeah, yeah. Or like the Yakima Training Center. Right?
Exactly.
That's restricted access. There's no general season. A little bit more terrain, but the potential's there. It's just there's no age on the deer.
Yeah, the deer just don't get the time to grow.
But then you go to places like the deepest, nastiest Cascade backcountry, where even people with goats or whatever struggle to get into. A deer can still live there and can still escape there. And if they live there and can stay there long enough in that nasty country, they're gonna get older, right?
Yeah.
But even under a 3-point management restriction, that's how you get a buck to doe ratio in Washington State that still hits objective, because you're never going to kill those 1 and 2 year old deer that don't make it to 3 points, right? But is that the most productive thing for a herd? My fast fact may point to that.
I'm not surprised at all. Yeah, I think management, it's a very touchy subject, and like I said, depending on what the future of Washington is, like I mean, at this point, like it can go so many ways, but the biggest issue about it is not everybody's on the same page, right?
Yeah.
There are plenty of people out there where they don't care about a 180-inch deer, right? Like what they care about is they want to go to camp every year.
Yeah.
And, they just want to go spend time with their family, shoot whatever they can.
Yeah.
And so that's kind of where you see a lot of the conflict within the hunters themselves. It's like some people say, I want to shoot the biggest buck there is. Even if that means that some people can't hunt every year. Where there's people on the other side where like, we don't care about big bucks. We just want to be able to hunt every year, right?
Yeah.
So it's the balance between opportunity and trophy potential that's the friction between hunters themselves.
And in a perfect scenario, not counting the fear of the commission and everything else, if you had, in a perfect world, you could manage at the unit level, not like hey, we have a mule deer draw now and we can't, like with Montana, they're seeing mule deer declines, and they've
terrible.
They cut 2,500 non-resident tags. That's not going to do anything.
No,
it's not like that is not a management decision that's going to have a long-term effect, because you can't apply those 2,500 people to a different part of the state where the mule deer herd is doing better, right? It's just still a statewide tag, and people can still overpressure the area that is in decline, right? And so at a unit level or even a sub-unit level, if you can manage for opportunity or trophy potential, right? Because you're going to have subsections of the hunting population that have different goals, right? And we see that already with different, like the West Side's managed 3-point minimum over the counter for elk. Yakima herd is a draw only, right, for branch bulls, right? That can exist in a permit-only system, like Oregon, for example. There's some units in a permit-only system that you can draw every year as a resident. There's some units that take you 15, 20 years, right?
Yep.
And if your priority is different, and in a lot of cases, if you're a resident, you can put in for that first choice and still draw a second choice tag and still hunt every year. Because in reality, if you're managing for opportunity in certain units that are less desirable, there's going to be an overabundance of tags that kind of carry over. And I actually did a podcast with the P and Wild Boys where I did like a whole PowerPoint presentation where I broke down what a theoretical draw-only system would look like. And if we applied Oregon's number of tags per mule deer, or per deer basically, to ours, it would be something like 80% of the people that hunt now would get a tag every year.
Which is still pretty high.
Still pretty high. Like, it's scary, but if you apply a certain management system to it, it's not going to go from, we can hunt every year to, unless you went to like a Nevada type system. But even in a Nevada type system, you'd probably still hunt every 3 years.
It's tough because all of this has to be in the reference frame that you trust the decisions that are being made with management. And that's just a caveat that a lot of people have not had with Washington, that Washington hasn't historically stood up to. And so I think I agree with you. In the perfect world, I think that draw systems can absolutely manage deer herds the best.
Yeah.
It allows you to look at herds on a kind of herd or even sub-herd specific level and manage those systems to where those herds are doing well.
If the biologists and the managers are in tune with
it's
what's going
all
on.
under that caveat as if they are in tune. And so, I mean, that is what it is.
Yeah.
But
No, I know. That's why I pointed out, like, I am kind of at the point where it's like, I don't think the current system statewide is benefiting. Like Brock said, I don't know how anyone could support a permit-only system. Like, it always goes bad. Well, in his position, he's at his, little Brock world where he's hunting mule deer. He's seeing deer and he's killing good deer.
He's got it figured out.
The state as a whole, though,
I
think is where, if you look at it at the statewide level, it's not the best. So I kind of think, because even for me, like I said, in the area where I'm hunting whitetails, we've got a lot of mature deer and a lot of nice bucks. And I think it's just a matter of time till we figure it out and start killing stuff. With that being said, I don't think the state of whitetail as a whole in Washington State, with EHD, with the management that the commission's doing with cougars, with CWD, which I don't, that's a whole different rabbit hole. I don't think it's the sky is falling thing that everyone else, or that a lot of managers think it is, but it's just another thing, affecting deer hunting and deer productivity in a herd specific level. It's not the best scenario, right, for me. And so I kind of just want to see, just for my sick, twisted, I don't think the current system's working. I support it, but I don't think anyone who doesn't support it is in the wrong for being fearful of
I just think based off of that discussion of going over the counter, I think if they ever plan to do something like that, I think from a starting perspective, it'd be best to do a trial, right? So for example, like back when they changed the Blue Mountains elk to spike only, they didn't do a statewide, hey, let's turn the whole state to spike. They said, let's test this management theory in the Blue Mountains. And within the reasoning of why they changed it, it wasn't to address low elk numbers, it was to address low bull to cow ratios, right?
Which
so
affected productivity.
That was the management why they implemented that rule. It wasn't because the elk herd itself was dying off. It was just there were not enough bulls per cows. And so they tested it and they said it worked. Now the problem today that we're facing isn't necessarily low bull to cow elk ratios. The whole herd in the Blue Mountains as a whole is just hurting. Okay, so now that brings a completely different conversation, because it's like, okay, we addressed how to have more bulls during the productivity season of breeding and whatnot. But what are you going to do now when even the cows themselves that are not being shot by hunters are also dying off, and the calves aren't making it? That's a completely different discussion.
Exactly.
Right, and so like that's why now it's like, all right, if we're trying to potentially change Washington into a draw, it's like pick out a few units and let's say let's just try it out here. Because the desert is a prime example of it. It's like that's a unit where we don't have a general season, and it's a pretty productive unit speaking for itself based off of just the trophy quality and also numbers.
Yeah.
Because I think that is one of the few units left that we have where you still have antlerless mule deer tags.
Yeah.
For the rest of the state, like, you're not shooting a mule deer doe, you know? So it's like, I don't know. I see both ways about it. But again, I think at the end of the day, it's so based off of the actual motives behind the agency that's going to be pushing this that, I don't know. You're going to have to convince a lot of people to do that way.
And I think one of the biggest sticking points for me, if they change it and don't change our licensing system, then I think it's all for naught. You can't make someone buy a tag and then put in for a draw-only permit and then tell them they have to pay for the whole thing. We're the only state I know of where you have to pay a non-refundable thing to play because they're saying, oh, well, you're getting an over-the-counter tag in return. If it moves to permit-only system, that system doesn't work anymore.
Exactly.
And it also discourages non-resident involvement in Washington State. Not that I'm saying that's a good thing to have even more people pile on, especially in an over-the-counter system. I think currently it's a good thing because we already have too many hunters for the resource. But if you move to permit only, that's more revenue source if you make someone buy a base hunting license and then purchase the tag once they draw. That makes more sense. But I don't know that the state's their accountants are ever going to go, this is going to make sense. Even though it probably will, because I was looking at the numbers. There's like 87,000 people that purchased an elk tag last year. Only 67,000 people used that tag to hunt. So there's according to the reporting system, which there's some fluctuation what the real number is, but there's some people that are here that are buying a tag that aren't using it. And I think that's highway robbery when you're saying, hey, we're giving you a tag. You got 2% chance of killing a spike with this tag. And there's some people that just aren't going to use that, but they're paying full price for it. That's not a productive system for, one, getting people to get involved and pay, especially with a price increase. I think the price increase, they're going to see so many less people like actually buy, like this year I didn't buy a bunch of oil tag stuff because I'm not going to pay $20
for an application
when I get 0.00% chance of drawing it, right? I spent $100 less than I normally do on my application stuff, and that's going to happen across the board. And now we are back to square one with funding because they increase the prices, but there's less people buying stuff, so it's not solving the issue. Where if you move to a base hunting license system, you could do a permit-only system, but then again, there's the other issue of our draw system dysfunction of where draw odds are so piss poor that even if you had like a trial run of a certain thing, so many people are going to put in for that now that they're going to go, oh, well, it doesn't work because I'm never going to draw a tag, right? Where if you blanketed it and did it, within 4 years, your point system is basically
that's
fixed.
Kind of the grave we dug ourselves in with our current point system. Like some people are like 25, 30 years in.
Yeah.
And so to just say, oh, sorry, like, screw your 30 points. It's like that. I'd be pissed if that was me, you know?
In my theoretical draw-only system, I propose, right? This is
this is your opinion.
If I was king of the world, right? You would do a hybrid phase-out point system where it would be half preference, half bonus for these huge number of tags now, right? If you're doing 80% of the number or even 60% of the number of hunters, that's how many tags are getting released. So let's say half of the people let's do 50. Half the people that put in are going to draw a tag, right? You give 50% of that preference, so all those people that have been putting in for 25 years are now benefiting from their effort, right? They get put at the front of the list for the most coveted tags, right? Because there are going to be some units that are managed for, trophy potential. Those people get put at the front of the list, right? Once they draw, you don't get to gain points like an Idaho system or New Mexico, right? Once you draw and the previous system points phase out, you get put into the pool of no preference points. And then you're in a system where you're giving out enough tags that people are like, you're getting a tag at least every 3 years, right? But you're now in a pool where it's not like, because you also could do a capped thing like Idaho does, right? They have zones where the tags are over the counter, but they're capped. They did a first come, first serve thing, and that didn't work for a couple of years, and now they're switching to a draw where it's a draw for an over-the-counter capped quota, right? It's more of a draw than it is an over-the-counter now, right? So you could do that, but then you're going to run into the issues of the first come, first serve thing. So why not just do a draw where there's no preference points? Everyone has the same chance every year. You're not going to run into point creep. You're still giving out a number of tags that it's, people are still getting tags every couple of years. I think that's the best way if you did implement it. But that's so many things for a government to do. It's never going to happen, right?
Yeah.
They couldn't do it in the best way possible because there's always going to be a manager at some level that's going to say, well, that's not going to work. And this doesn't meet our bottom line and our funding's going to get decreased or, the commission's going to have a say in it or whatever. It's going to get messed up because bureaucracy.
Yep.
But I like to think of
No, I agree. Even within our own point system right now, I still just think that, like, at minimum, 10% should just go to the highest point holders.
Mm-hmm.
Like, I think it's so baloney that, like, a guy sitting on 30 moose points essentially has the same odds as me sitting on, like, 10 points.
Yeah.
Like, I don't think that's fair at all, but because I think that's what Oregon does. I think 10% goes to the highest point holders no matter what it is, right? And in the cases where there's not enough tags to even allocate 10%, then it just goes to the highest point, regardless. I just think that in a perfect world where you had to limit tags because there's not enough game, that's the best way to go about it. But because we're so deep in our system right now, there's going to be a lot of people, if we were to ever switch the system, a lot of people are going to have to suck it up and just take the loss.
Yeah.
Right? Because I lost my spring bear season. I was like, dude, I donated like $80. And it's just like $80 that I don't know what I'm going to ever get back.
Same. Yep.
So it's just like, at some point, if there's ever a change, I think there's going to be a lot of people who just have to take the short end of the stick.
Yeah. Yep.
But that's a discussion for, a different time. We had a lot of engagement just on that one podcast alone because, everybody's affected by it.
Yeah. And everyone has like a slightly, when I was looking into this whole thing, I called like 10 different people and I heard 10 different answers.
I know. You called me. I know. Yeah. But I'm just saying it's an interesting thing because in the grand scheme, and that's you or us thinking for the good of the state.
Good of the resource, right?
Good for everything.
Yeah.
But in terms where, like, in our current system right now, because we don't have the power to manage it.
Yeah.
Like you just say, well, I'll just manage this herd of 30 deer for what I want.
Yeah.
Right?
To tie it back to the whole thing, we didn't have any more mature deer living on our property. Basically, 2.5 and younger was the amount of the bucks that were living on our property. This year, I have a deer that is at least 3.5 living on the property.
Really?
Yeah. And so that was like the biggest. Is the things that I'm doing going to actually make this a better hunting, Because up until then, we did the 3.5 and 4.5 year old deer would show up like maybe October 25th, but usually like the first week of November. They would rut on the property and then they would leave, and then we'd
never see them.
Yeah. So last year we had the 4.5 year old that Lisa killed, and then I think 3.5 year old bucks that. Is one of those 3.5 year old bucks and now a 4.5 living on our property. Now that we, have all these benefits for them to stay and stick there, and there's a number of other things I've got in the works that I want to like test out. But
are you finding sheds on the property?
No, well, 2.5 year old sheds,
but none of the big bucks.
None of the big bucks. They leave.
The thing about that is, like, even though you're necessarily doing that food plot for yourself, I think that as a whole, you're benefiting that entire herd.
Oh, 100%.
Like, because regardless whether they end up on your property or hunting season, like, they're probably still eating your resources at some point in time.
So my theory is that everyone that's in like a 5-mile radius of us is going to start seeing big bucks in the next few years because
because of you.
Well, because deer behavior, right? When a deer reaches 2.5 years of age, if their doe family group that they were born into is still in that area, especially its mother, and it's a buck, they get kicked out. It's like an anti-incestuous safeguard.
Like the doe kicks them out?
The doe will not let them be there.
Oh.
Because it invites the chance for inbreeding.
Oh, interesting.
And so I think all these little healthy spikes and 2.5 year old bucks that were growing on our property, split, and they're going to grow into giants if they can get to age class once they
Either
once they
that
leave.
or your neighbor's just going to see a bunch of influx of spikes on their property. You're like, where are all these spikes coming from?
Yeah.
And they're just breeding on your property or something.
Yeah, so I don't know if that's actually true. It's just in my mind, it's like there's 200-inch whitetails on a mile away.
Well, either way, it's going to be a net positive.
Yeah.
Well, with that said, how much money have you dumped into this, though? I can't imagine
Me
it's cheap.
$0.
Okay, you're using bank money. Let's just call it that.
Well, that's where, again, I'm in the super fortunate.
Yeah, you
that's
are.
not true. I have spent money on stuff. Dave and Lisa try to reimburse me for this stuff because it's at the end of the day, this is another thing. Like if you get, I think permission, Midwest and East Coast, it's like almost completely shifting to lease stuff because there's money in it, right? The culture hasn't shifted here, and I hope it doesn't, right? And there's things that are driving that in the Midwest. I think baiting is one of the big things because you can buy a lease on a 20-acre property, throw out corn or apples or whatever, and have a chance at killing a big giant deer, and you pay for it, right? Here, that culture doesn't exist. I think whitetails are still an opportunity resource, generally speaking. There's guys who like getting after more mature deer, but I think when you look at hunters who are out hunting deer, it's like the little bit longer seasons. We have a whole late season in the rut. It might be mule deer hunters that struck out during general season might kick east and try to go kill a meat buck or something, right? If you can get permission on a private ground that has tillable land or an area you can put a food plot in, I would be hard pressed to think that a landowner would be like, no, I don't want you to do that, if it met their goals, because you're benefiting their property in the long term. You're adding equity to their land, right? You're doing things that are going to benefit if they sell or if they cut off your permission. Oh, they got a food plot there, and that they can have family or whatever come hunt now. So to say you don't have access to do this, you just got to go put the work in and knock on doors. Because I've been more successful knocking on doors than a lot of people think that they could be if you're courteous and I mean you said you have access to a property kind of near here. And
yeah, I went through the trenches knocking on doors last year. But finally ended up with a yes.
Yeah, exactly. In certain areas it's gonna change. It's gonna be different. But I think I've had like a unusually high success. I had like a really sweet property that had access to south of Spokane that had a lot of bucks on it. Had an alfalfa field and then a river bottom and timber, and with baiting it was like I think we had like 15 different bucks on a mock scrape down in there, and so things get locked up and things change. But if you have that, you're in that position, it's like put in a pretty clover plot, or whatever that's going to be green and look nice, or a alfalfa or sandflower or something beautiful, right? You could put in a perennial plot that's gonna benefit the landowner. So
you do a lot of quote unquote artificial food plots, but what are some of the natural things that you're doing on the property? Are you putting scrapes out? Are you putting licking branches out, or what are you doing?
When Dave purchased an adjacent land, because he originally had 120 acres, he added 80 acres at one point, and then a couple more. It had a pear tree with a community scrape on it, and it was like, oh, this is the ticket. They were all up there rutting around and hitting this mock scrape, not coming on our side of the fence. But now he had that side of the fence. And then, like, literally, like, the perfect, I have awesome video of deer, with their head up in the licking branch and scraping. And then my mother-in-law cut the branch off the next year.
Why?
Because she just likes trimming stuff, and she hacked at it.
And she didn't know it was a licking branch?
I told her not to cut it, but she cut it anyway. It was a sore spot for a while. So I hung a rope from it, right? Because there's guys that go, oh, you can hang rope. And it didn't work real great for the first couple of years, but I've kind of shifted it. I do a hybrid rope system where I have the rope, I cut it high where it's not like in the typical scrape zone, and then I'll hang the branches that I notice they like to scrape on from that rope because it gives it rigidity where there's like more weight to it, and then I can add stuff where I want it. And I have probably 4 or 5 mock scrapes, and that system seems to be working the best. I also sometimes I showed him one. It's a 2x4 hang that I screwed into a grand fir.
Oh, really?
Some tree, I don't remember what type it is, where it overhangs. because I think that overhanging nature of a licking branch is like the key. If you can get a trap, you can't just throw out a scrape anywhere and expect deer to use it. That's not how that works.
Mm-hmm.
If you have a travel corridor, a transition zone, an edge where they like to, move along. So I overhang a 2x4 so it's like sitting in their face when they're walking down a trail, and then hang that rope system off of it. I think that's the ticket, because they seem to gravitate towards that really well. I'm probably going to do water holes and other stuff like that. But
So really, there's a lot of similarities between what you're doing on your property and public land hunting. Really, the only change is food source.
Yeah.
Like on public land, you're probably not hunting over soybeans and corn and whatnot. But you can, if you know how to look, when you do your research, or whether you just seen them out there, you can find a spot where you know that these animals, these deer, are eating this during this time of the year, and then make your own stuff around it. Because one of the things that I've come to learn is, like, some people, I haven't done this yet, but some people will go and make their own wallows.
Oh, yeah.
Like, they'll go out with, literally pack a shovel with them, and they'll be like, yeah, this was like a little wet spot, and they just go and dig it up, and then animals start using it. And so
or
it's like,
when we could put salt out, you dump salt right on the edge of the creek there, and
oh,
it turns
yeah.
into, I made a couple wallows in Yakima elk country doing that. Just drop 75 pounds of salt, down in an area in summertime, and then there's wallows out there that are like 10 by 10 that I made, me and some of the boys I hunted with made.
But all I'm saying is, like, even though we're not allowed to bait here anymore, there's still a lot of ways where you can legally, artificially, per se, do things that attract animals. Like this wallow idea, that where you just bring a shovel and just dig up an old wet ground or something. That's a way to get a wallow made. Or like you, wet back when you can throw salt. Just salt it, and the animals, because they use it so much, they just break the ground down.
Yeah, and if you know they're transitioning in that area, you can now set it up for the thermals.
And then even one step further back then, like what Brock was saying, he had this really old game trail that had a bunch of deadfall in it, and then they stopped using it, and he just went and cleared it out, and they were using it again.
So my whitetail spot, JP, it's kind of a valley divided by a pretty big creek. He found a old road that's not on the map that basically gives you access to an area where you'd have to hike like 4.5 miles past the gate to get to. We got to hike like less than a mile now down, and we cut it out. The amount of animal travel that's going to happen, that's going to go on that, because I think we cut out probably 100 down logs. Like we worked.
That's a lot.
We had chainsaws and lemon saws, and we made it a nice little trail. It's still not visible from the road.
You hide it a little bit.
We didn't cut right at the edge, so it's still tough to find. But the deer definitely can, and the moose and everything. It's going to be a highway if we keep that open. And on the other side, there's like a thin timber with a bunch of native browse where I can go sit with my muzzleloader.
But that's my point. Like that, everything you're talking about is public land. Like this is stuff that anybody else can hunt. And even though we've been really focusing on what you're doing on the private property, there's a lot of things that you can take from what you've done there, translate it to public land, and still find success that way, right?
100%.
You can't plant a food plot on public land per se, but there's so many other avenues that you can still do to fine-tune spot or improve per se that spot for your success and draw in animals that way. Yep. And I think that's the biggest thing that I don't think people would even think about, because to them it's like, if the natural resource isn't already there, it's just like, well, I have to go find a natural resource. Sometimes you just got to make one, right? Like the wallow. I was stressing out the other day so much. I'm like, man, I don't know that many wallows. Like, dude, I could just go make my own wallow. You know, it's simple like that.
Or people that go, oh, this area used to be super good, but now you're in a late successional growth cycle of that forest area or whatever, and it's grown up. The deer that were living in there have probably just shifted
a little bit
as far as they had to get to the good stuff, right?
Yeah.
And I know Brock mentioned, or maybe it wasn't Brock, he was like, if you can find an old timer say this area was good, I think there's a caveat to that, because if it grows up to the point where, you know, it's no longer beneficial to wildlife and deer, then that rule may not be like in a very specific location type thing. That's probably not how that works. And I think you talk to people who are like, oh, this area is not like it used to be or whatever. That could be entirely due to that successional growth cycle that region is in. But if there was, you know, disturbance of some kind that reset that nearby, shift a little bit, you know?
That's what I always say, dude. I always say that you got to be fluid with hunting.
Yeah.
Because so many people, like there's a clear cut where I said on my cam the other day, I haven't been up there in like 5 years. Back then, it's a field.
Yeah.
And so when they clear cut the field because it's so flat, you can see the whole thing. Dude, now you can't see into it.
Do you know what type of shrubs are growing in it?
I think they're tamaracks are yellow, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, they're tamaracks.
Tamaracks.
Yeah.
So, like I said, a lot of light.
Well,
getting
it's
in.
crazy because it's like the field is tamarack, but along the creek bottom it's just aspens.
Mhm.
So if you look at it, like the aspens, they didn't log. Like they're huge.
Yep.
But you can see the aspens.
And the saplings, the suckers that are coming up on those aspens are probably getting real thick too, huh?
Oh, dude, like I've never walked down there.
Yeah.
Like I've just walked the road and looked down there. I'm like, dude, there's nothing down there. But then
okay.
there is because there's a giant creek, and up at the head there's actually a wallow. But I just don't hunt the wallow because the road literally comes on top of it.
Aspen and elk go together like peanut butter and jelly.
Oh yeah, that's why we don't have a lot of aspens here, right? But to me, I tell people all the time, like if you find an aspen tree, elk are usually not that far from them.
Yeah. Yeah, when they selective cut for aspens and those saplings and stuff grow up, that's because that's how aspens develop. Is they have suckers that they put up that if you reduce competition by other timber species, it will grow because it's all one genetic species. Like the biggest single genetic species on Earth is an aspen grove in Utah because it's every single shoot that it puts up is the same root system. So if you reduce competition, it will expand. So when they did that selective cut for larches and aspen, the aspen eventually, if it's not over-competed with, will expand. So
if you could leave the viewers based off of one note that you've learned on the food plot that can be applied to pretty much any hunting, whether that's public land or private land, what would you say? What's one, or maybe some of the things you've learned?
I think we've already touched on that. I would say my big light bulb moment with at least Western stuff has to do with cereal grains. And I was showing Nate that wheat or cereal grains everywhere, it grows everywhere out in the Intermountain West, right? It's one of the main staple crops that farmers will grow because it will grow here. You plant it in the fall or the spring and it matures into the summer. But all of them harvest it before it's utilized by deer, if ever. And then there's two types of wheat. There's a Ond variety, which has all those little hairs. Like when you think of a wheat seed head, there's hairs on that. For the most part, deer, elk, whatever, won't eat that because it irritates their throat when they chew it up. But the seed inside has a similar nutritional profile to corn. So for me, it was like light bulb moment. There's ondless varieties that don't have those hairs. So if I plant ondless varieties of wheat and leave it standing, it's basically like a cornfield for deer. And if you leave it standing, they will sit there and eat every wheat head off of it. And the University of Tennessee did a study where they planted Ond varieties and then ondless varieties in competing rows. So it'd be like a row of Ond, row of ondless. And the deer ate the heads off of all the ondless varieties. And so it's like a baseball field of like rows where the deer browsed every single head off of the wheat.
So sometimes it's not even the big details. It's just a little nuance, and there's a reason why that buck's in front of you or he's over there.
Yeah, and so that's one of the biggest things I'm testing, and I think that's like if I can time it right, if I can get the right variety, then that's going to be like the game changer for food plots in the West. So
well, we'll definitely have to catch up with you maybe sometime later down the road where all your theories right now have been proven or whether disproven, whatever the case may be, because food plots are something that I don't know anything about. So this has been a very interesting topic. But man, that's been a discussion. Even though it's a lot about food plot, there's still a lot of correlation to what we can do on public land, because I pretty much exclusively hunt public land. Even like you said, you do that food plot, but you're still basically hunting public land. Nate's pretty much primarily a public land hunter too. And so don't just disregard this podcast thinking like I don't have acres to go do a food plot, so there's nothing I can learn. There's a lot of things you can learn from just using what Jacob has learned with making his own food plot that you can apply to your own public land hunts per se. But with that said, Jacob, obviously you gave a shout out that you're starting the Western Edge YouTube channel, Instagram and whatnot. So we'll leave that stuff in the description below if you guys are interested in following. But with that said, we're going to wrap things up here and jump into fast facts. And I believe you also have a fast fact.
Let me pull it up. I'll have you guys do yours first.
For the past couple of weeks, I've been, like Nate was saying, I was off the charts. But this week I decided to bring it back to earth a little bit. Well, while Jacob is pulling his, I guess I'll start because mine is pretty direct to what we've been talking about. So my Trivia Duel was basically the idea that deer are primarily browsers. My fast fact is simply the opposite. So elk are actually grazers, okay? So grazers first for elk, secondarily they're browsers. And so elk will actually eat grass year-round if it's possible, because they're not always around areas where there's grass. And grass being that they're always at the bottom or at the ground, sometimes snow is so high, it forces them to browse whatever's above the snow. So with that said, according to Outdoor Life, grasses make up 73% of an elk's diet on average. So that just tells you how much grass these elk are feeding on. So if you find a field on private land and you don't have access there and you're trying to pull them off public land, good luck. Because you're probably not pulling them off that.
Yep. Can I add something to that?
Go for it.
So the reason that elk can break down grasses and deer can't is because of the size of their gut and the diversity of their gut biome. So there's compounds in grass, even though grass is super high in protein, that after a certain stage, a deer can't utilize because their gut won't break it down. Just like that rumen acidosis in the winter when they've shifted to woody browse, their gut is never at a point where they could just graze and eat.
So elk just have a hardier stomach.
Just like cattle. Yeah, they all have 4-chambered stomachs. I mean,
Yep.
I was watching your meat eater and you're breaking it down. They're all 4-chambered. Just the size and the diversity of a deer's gut is what
Interesting.
prevents it from being able to utilize grass year round.
Good to know. I didn't know that. Is your fast dog ready?
It's not loading because the service is kind of bad, but I can get to the
meat of it.
The meat of it. So in an elk study that they did, and this goes to age distribution and its benefits to productivity of a herd, they moved the peak pregnancy or insemination period, or the rut as a whole, from 67 days down to 31 days. When it was 67 days, the majority of the bulls that were breeding the cows were spikes or yearling bulls. When they distributed age class, it shrunk that rut period to 31 days, where all the cows were bred within a 31-day period, and there wasn't a second estrus cycle where the cows were being bred. And that was one of the key factors in shifting that Blue Mountain herd, and why they wanted to distribute age class and have better bull to cow ratios is because when you have a longer rut period, that means your calves are being dropped over a 67-day period, which allows predators to affect that calf recruitment, and you have younger calves going into winter, their body condition is less ideal. So you're having higher calf mortality in the long run, leading to this cycle of lessened productivity by the herd.
That makes a lot of sense.
Yeah, so
that's a good one.
That's the benefit of having distributed age class within a population. And like I said, with our mule deer management in certain zones, if you're having 1.5 and 2.5-year-old deer doing a majority of the breeding, it's probably not the most beneficial for a productivity of a herd. So,
wow, the more you know.
My fast fact is kind of Samong's, took Samong's Avenue from the last few weeks and kind of went off on this one. But it is still wildlife related. The Arctic fox, which I prior thought it would be the muskox. I thought it was the muskox that had the warmest coat that is known. It's actually the Arctic fox, and it has one of the warmest coats on the planet, possibly the warmest coat. And all of its hairs are hollow, which is how it helps insulate. And studies have shown that they are able to stay warm, comfortable up to -50 Fahrenheit, and their body does not start shivering to create warmth until -94 Fahrenheit.
Oh my Lord.
Holy.
That is incredible.
That is some freezing temperatures.
Isn't that crazy?
That is crazy. Wow, little Arctic fox. That's crazy. I would have thought of muskox too, because I've seen them in some of the blizzard. Have you seen Remy Warren's muskox?
Yes.
Dude, that was crazy.
Crazy. Yeah.
Arctic fox.
Can't wrap your mind around this type of temperatures. Well, folks, this was a completely different topic than we normally talk about. And I mean, we worked public land and all those kind of things into it, but it's something that I'm naive about, Samong's naive about, and Jacob was naive about a couple of years ago. And yeah, I'm sure you probably feel like you know just a little bit more than we do, but yeah, your wealth of knowledge on this is really cool, especially for this region of the country, with the type of habitat that we have for these deer. And then, like Samong said, if you guys want to follow along with what Jacob's learning, and this is something that you're interested in, whether it's for your own private land or kind of understanding this growth cycle and how to better analyze habitat for public land hunting, he's going to start posting videos here coming up, and he's been backlogging stuff so that there's some consistency there. Yeah, man, thanks for coming on the podcast and sharing.
Me, guys. Yeah, it's fun.
With that, we will see you guys next Tuesday.
That's right. 5 o'clock in the morning.